Great to see you. Very well indeed.
Okay. All right, good evening, everyone. How are you? Fantastic. Gosh, it's marvelous and cool in here. Thank God for that. But look, it's so great to see you. Thank you for making some time for me this evening, because I have this great privilege at the moment of talking to all of you, all our members, sharing ideas for the future, and in fact, hearing so many people all come to me and say, wow, you're even shorter in real life. It's not how I imagined this would start, but here we are. Now look, I am standing here in front of you tonight for one very simple reason, and it's because our country did something extraordinary for my family by welcoming them here as immigrants 60 years ago. Now, I was raised with a few simple values. The first among those is that family means everything to me, because we all know as conservatives that the bonds of family are far greater than anything any government could ever hope to replicate, and we must never, ever forget that. Now, in my family, the thing that we prioritized above all was hard work as the way to forge ahead. My dad was an NHS GP. My mum ran the local chemist in Southampton where I grew up, and I spent all my time working in her shop, out and about, delivering medicines in the community. And I also did her books, and I saw the power of that small business to provide jobs and opportunity in our local community. Now, for my parents, there was one thing that they believed, above all else, could provide a better future for their 3 children. And it was simple. It was education. And that's why today I passionately believe that the best way that we reduce inequality in society, the best way that we spread opportunity around, indeed, the best way that we can transform people's lives is by ensuring that the birthright of every child is a world-class education. And that, in a nutshell, are my values. Patriotism, family, hard work, aspiration. And I know, looking at you and seeing you nodding, that those are your values too. And that's because they're conservative values. And that's why I want to be your PM, to put those values into action to build a better Britain. Just as this country allowed my family to do that, I want to do the same for everyone, your children and grandchildren too. But how are we going to do that? Well, we need to do 3 things. We need to restore trust, first of all. We need to rebuild the economy, and we need to reunite our country. Now, when it comes to restoring trust, for me, first of all, that's about honesty. And as you can see in this leadership race, I have not chosen to say the things that people may want to hear. I've said the things that I believe they need to hear. Because even though it doesn't make my life easy, it is honest, and that is what leadership is all about. But we'll also restore trust by delivering on the things that matter to people. That's why I've set out a plan to finally start reforming the NHS, so we can stop talking always about how much money we're putting in and more about the healthcare that we're getting out of it. It's why I want to take on this lefty woke culture that seems to want to cancel our history, our values, and our women. And it's why I finally have got a plan to get to grips with illegal migration. Because I stand here as a product of our country's compassionate, proud history in welcoming people to our shores, and that will never change. But it must be done fairly. It must be done legally. And it's not all of us are seeing on our TV screens the scenes of people coming here illegally, and we've got to stop it. And with my plan, we can. We can stop making European rules protect us from doing the things that we want to do. We can restore trust back in the system and take back proper control of our borders. Now, when it comes to rebuilding the economy, you all know what the number 1 challenge is. It's inflation. And we've seen this story before. Inflation is the enemy that makes everyone poorer. It eats into people's hard-earned savings and pensions. It pushes up mortgage rates. Now, this autumn and winter, I will make sure that we protect those who most need our help and support them through the worst of this crisis, as any compassionate conservative government must do. But what I will not do is pursue policies that risk making inflation far worse and last far longer, especially if those policies seem to amount to nothing more than borrowing £50 billion and putting that on the country's credit card and then asking our kids and our grandkids to pick up the tab, because that's not right. It's not responsible, and it is certainly not conservative. Now, I will cut taxes. And in this Parliament, for the first time in 16 years, I will deliver a cut to income tax. And I won't stop there. Like Margaret Thatcher and Nigel Lawson, I want to keep cutting income tax year after year, because a Conservative government that I lead will ensure that hard work always pays. But we're going to do that responsibly, by being tough on public spending and by growing our economy. That's why this autumn, I want to radically change how we tax businesses in this country, to cut taxes for those businesses that are investing in expanding, businesses that are innovating to create the products and the services of tomorrow, because that's how you drive growth in a modern economy. And we need to take advantage of our Brexit freedoms. As Chancellor, I was ushering in the biggest reform of our financial services regulations in decades. As Prime Minister, I will go further, because we need to be radical when it comes to our regulations in data, life sciences, AI, agri-tech. And I know with my business experience that I can lead our economy into that future and seize the opportunities that are there waiting for us if we are prepared to be bold about grasping them. Because in 2 years' time, we have to do something very special. When we reunite our country, we have to make British political history by winning a 5th general election in a row. Now, I believe that is possible. All of us working together can do it, but it is going to require us to appeal to swing voters everywhere. In London and in the north, in liberal areas and Labour areas, in urban areas and rural areas, in Wales and in Scotland. And I passionately believe, and all the evidence suggests, I am the candidate that offers our party the best opportunity of winning that election and ensuring Keir Starmer never walks through the doors of number 10 Downing Street. Now, in conclusion, let me just say this. As Chancellor, you saw me acting radically, boldly in the pandemic to successfully safeguard our economy through the biggest shock it had faced in 300 years. Now, as Prime Minister, I promise you, I will apply that same sense of urgency and grip and radicalism to every other aspect of government as we build a better Britain. A Britain where our kids can walk safely on the streets at night. A Britain where the NHS is reformed and efficient and there for us when we need. A Britain where our schools and apprenticeships are the envy of the world in providing opportunity, and a Britain where our economy is the most dynamic it has ever been, with businesses investing and innovating to create jobs in every part of our country. But I also promise you this, perhaps more important, that I will give my all to ensuring that each and every one of you here tonight can always feel enormously proud of the Conservative government that I will be privileged to lead. So I humbly ask for your support, not just to be our next party leader, but also the next Prime Minister of our great country. Thank you. Right.
Thank you very much indeed, Rishi. We'll basically follow the same procedure as we did with Liz to demonstrate the fairness, if that's okay. This weekend, you said that the attempted assassination of Salman Rushdie was a wake-up call. You say that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard should be prescribed as a terrorist organisation. You say there's little life in the discussions with Iran on their acquiring nuclear weapons. I don't think there'll be many people in the room who will disagree with you, but unfortunately the Americans have a different view. Now, if you're elected, one of the first calls you'll get is from Joe Biden. What will you say to Joe to persuade him that what you're saying is right?
Well, first of all, Eric, now we're on the topic, I want to say it's been a great privilege that I've had as minister in government and Backbridge MP to work with you and many colleagues on these topics. Actually, you do a great job. And Stuart Pollack was the first, I think he's on the live stream, was one of the first people that I met as a backbench MP. I'm very fortunate to have Stephen helping me, and James, I know, does a phenomenal job. So it would just, for me to say thank you to all of you for the dialogue and the support that you've always given me, because you do play a fantastic part in our party and our country. Now, look, on this question of Iran, well, first of all, I think it's more complicated than that, because remember, it's not just about Joe Biden, it's about Congress as well. And the Republicans have a very clear point of view on this. And when it comes to the JCPOA, I think that the idea that will get through in any way, shape, or form as it is currently constructed, I think is low, right? I mean, people may have their own agreements on that. So I think it is realistic to have a dialogue with the Americans that says, how do we change the dynamic here? Right, and that is about making sure that we put snapback sanctions on the table. And look, remember, we've done this. We just did it with Ukraine and Russia. When we started that process, we were out ahead of everybody. But we managed to use our diplomacy to go and say to everyone, particularly more in Europe in this case, hang on, everyone needs to wake up to the threat that is going on. I did that on economic sanctions. I got on the phone with Janet Yellen. I was like, you guys need to come and help. You need to pitch in and do this with us. I did the same in Europe. Because if you think about how we're conducting warfare against Russia, it's economic warfare. And that's what I did as Chancellor. So I've got a track record in persuading our allies to join with us to do some things that will protect our mutual security. So I think actually I'm more confident about that, because Iran is a major threat. And it is not just about the missile program. And there, as I said, we've got to put snapback sanctions on the table if we're going to have any hope of progressing this thing properly. We've got to recognize the threat that they pose in funding terrorism and supporting terrorism. And that is something that I said at the weekend, given exactly what's happened with Salman Rushdie, it brings back for all of us, right? Where is this from? It's from this fatwa, right? That is there for however many decades. And it just reminds us of the threat that they pose. Now, look, I would like to get in and see the security briefings and everything else, but it seems an entirely reasonable position to think that if we've prescribed Hezbollah and Hamas, then the parent organization is also, there's an argument for prescribing it, and I think that will allow us to start building a coalition against it. So look, the experience in Russia and Ukraine, in a nutshell, gives me confidence that we can win the argument on this, because we must, because it poses a very serious threat to all of our interests and stability in the region.
Last week at the Westminster Synagogue, you said that Jerusalem was unmistakably the capital of Israel, but it wasn't as easy as that, just to declare it so. Could you take the audience through what are the obstacles to make it for Britain recognizing the basic fact that Jerusalem is Israel's capital?
Yes, look, I mean, to me, it's undisputed to be the historic capital. Clearly, there's a very strong case for it to be recognized. And the point I was making then, as I would make now, is I'm very open to looking at that, right? Well, and all I was saying is, having not been Foreign Secretary, there must be some sensitivities involved, because if it was that easy, it would have been done by now. And before saying, yes, it can be done overnight, I'd like to get in there and understand the reasons why it has proved difficult. But prima facie, it seems to me that there is a very strong case to do it, to recognize what is a historic and practical step, that is what it is. And you talked before about our American allies. Again, this would be something where we would be acting in concert with our allies in the region and one of our closest allies. So it's something I'd like to do.
The first speech you made from the dispatch box was for Holocaust Remembrance Day. And I wonder if you'd like to tell the audience why you think 80 years on, Holocaust remembrance is still important.
You're right. It's well researched, Eric. I remember it. That was my. I mean, Robert will remember this as well. It's an incredibly nerve-wracking experience. Actually, the two things that are probably one of the most nerve-wracking is your maiden speech, and then the first time you make a speech at the dispatch box. And that first dispatch box piece for me was responding to that debate, which is something that the department that Robert and I both worked in, or he ran, got to be responsible for. And it was an incredible privilege. It was an incredible privilege to hear the stories and be reminded that, you know, for someone who has two young girls, right? I have two young girls who are 9 and 11, and unless they are being spoken to, unless they are being educated about what happened, right, this will be lost. Because the people that are still here, who we can still hear from, and that's marvelous, right? They're not going to be with us forever. So that's why, for the next generation and the generation beyond, for my two girls, they need to understand what happened so that we never forget the awfulness and can remember the lessons and protect ourselves against anything like that ever happening again. And that's why, I had the privilege to work with you and Robert on the memorial. And it's important that we crack on with that. I was pleased as Chancellor to ensure that the funding in perpetuity will be for people to be able to visit it free. And Robert and I talked about as well, making sure whether there's an option to put an amendment into the levelling up bill that's coming to speed that through. But that will serve as an incredible institution and legacy for this that we can use to educate my two girls and everyone else, because if we don't, then we risk forgetting what was something that humanity should never ever forget.
A lot of people are surprised that we are in a position where goods from Israel or services from Israel can be boycotted. We fought an election on ensuring that we produce a bill to deal with the BDS movement. Will you give a commitment that we can see that soon?
Yes. And I think, look, don't just take my word for it, because you can judge me by my record as well. That same job I had as local government minister, one of my responsibilities was the local government pension scheme. And that's where you started to see some elements of this coming in. And you'll remember this from your time in the department as well, Eric, right? So, I was pleased to be able to put some in place, some mechanisms that then Robert was able to take when he was Secretary of State to ensure that in the local government pension scheme, this type of behaviour was just simply not acceptable. And I'm pleased that we were able to do it. Actually, one of the things that Stuart on the live stream was helpful to me and at the time as well. And that should give you the confidence this is something that I do take seriously, because when it was relevant to my job, I went on and acted on it. And as Prime Minister, we need to make sure that we do pass that bill. And you're right, it's a manifesto commitment. It shouldn't be controversial. And I'd like to crack on and do it as quickly as possible.
Right, we'll take questions from the audience. I also have a number of questions that have been put in. We'll take the distinguished gentleman at the back. But before he gets a question, I'll just ask one that's been handed in, which is from Linda Ann Kelly, which says, what are you going to do to stop anti-Semitism? Jewish individuals need protection so that they can attend schools and places of worship. There's also anti-Semitism in universities. Why does the Jewish community need the support of CST in 2022? Why can't it feel safe in our own country?
Yeah, it's shocking that the question has to be asked, right? And as I can catch the lady's name.
It's Linda Ann Kelly.
Linda, as she says, that why does the CST need to exist, right? I mean, that is an incredibly sad situation, but the fact is it does. And that's why I'll make sure that, as I did as Chancellor, we continue to fund it with all the resources it needs to keep everyone safe. And that's an obvious commitment that you'll have for me. But look, how do we stop the root cause of this from being necessary? Well, it's about education, and it's about the work that we did on taking the IHRA definition and then spreading that across the country, as I did as local government minister through our councils, as we now need to do across the rest of public institutions. It's about taking the lessons from the Union of Jewish Students about how we can improve awareness on campuses, because you would have seen the article in the Jewish Chronicle just last month. Incidents of anti-Semitism on campuses up something extraordinary over the last several years, right? And how can you read that and not feel your heart be pulled? So they have some great suggestions which we should take on board. We should use the new definition and push it out. We should make sure that we support the CST, and it goes back to making sure that we get the memorial built, because the best way to stop this is by educating people. And the more we can spread awareness and education in every part of our society and every generation, the closer we will be to eradicating this awful, awful thing that, as someone who has experienced racism in its form, of course I know it stings. It stings more than anything else in my life, and I get a lot of stuff thrown at me. That is the type of abuse that really cuts you in a way that is different. And I've experienced that, and I can't imagine how it feels, but I will do everything I can to root it out and protect people who need it.
Gentleman at the back and the lady here.
This is the distinguished gentleman you were talking about, Eric, right?
Well, yes, yeah. It does look quite nutty.
Thank you. One of the expressions used by both the British government and some overseas governments to describe the territory west of the Jordan, the West Bank, some people call it Judea and Samaria, and Gaza, is occupied Palestinian territories. I'm wondering, because this prejudges any solution, whether we can get the language changed from occupied Palestinian territories to disputed territories.
Okay. Well, thank you for the question, sir. Look, I can't stand here. I can't stand here and say, yes, I will definitely do that, because obviously I don't know the intricacies of what that involves or not, but I completely understand the sentiment of what you're saying, right? And it upsets me, as I'm sure it ups you tenfold, that there's an organization which glorifies terrorist attacks on Israel. There's an organization that spreads hate in its schools, and that we need to call that out. We need to look at what the UN do to support it and make sure that they're accountable with the funding and the resources they get and how they're using it. Because difficult as all those things are, for especially you, but also me, to deal with, we also recognize that the only way to end conflict is through some kind of resolution. And we need to recognize that. So whilst we are tough, and we should be tough, and whilst we have to deal with these things that they do, which we should be very accountable for them and not be afraid to call out, the way through this is by dialogue with them at some point. And that's why, as hard as it was just recently with the Palestinian Islamic Jihad and the attacks that rained down and the people that were killed, right, that is what we are dealing with. So I totally understand where you're coming from. If it was my family that were being bombed like that, I would feel exactly the same. So I can understand where you're coming from, and you will have my total commitment that I will fight very hard for the security of people in Israel. And that means being tougher and calling out behavior from the Palestinians that needs to be in no doubt. I will be happy to do that, because that's the right thing to do.
And we've got a question from Henry Davies. Mr. Sunak, I think you need to stress that some disadvantaged people in this country are unlikely to be paying very much tax, if at all, and that direct payments are fundamental to supporting these people. Tax reductions benefit the better off.
Well,
I mean,
yes, I agree.
A very hard question.
No, but this is, it's really good that this is on the table. Look, the number one issue confronting this country right now is the cost of energy, right? And this autumn and winter, millions of people are going to face an extraordinarily difficult time with their energy bills going up by £1,000 or more. And my view is the right thing to do, what a compassionate Conservative government must do, is provide direct financial assistance to those people for the reasons outlined. A tax cut that Liz is proposing when she was here, and I'm sure she said, I'm going to deliver tax cuts, everyone probably cheered, because who doesn't like tax cuts? But that tax cut is going to be worth about £1,700 to her. For someone working really hard on the national living wage, finds himself in this situation because of a war that has nothing to do with them, where we are taking the right action to stand up to Russia, that person is going to get a tax cut worth barely £1 a week. For a pensioner worried about the winter and their health, who doesn't work, millions of them, that tax cut is worth precisely £0. Now, if we do not take action, as I will do, to support millions of people, they risk falling into destitution. It's as simple as that. Not acting and relying on tax cuts instead would be a moral failure, in my view. I don't think the British public will ever forgive us, and as Prime Minister, I will never let that happen. It's as simple as that.
Lady here, and then Howard Lee at the front.
Mr. Sunak, thank you. I was going to ask a completely different question, but given what's happened to Sarah Muscroft, the head of the United Nations humanitarian coordination in Israel, which of course everyone says occupied territories, she's been relieved of her position because she criticized Islamic Jihad for the rockets they not only fired on Israel, but actually misfired and landed on their own people, killing children too, and blaming Israel for that. Are we ever going to be able to stand up again to the United Nations, because they are becoming very anti-Semitic? And I want to know if we're strong enough to actually change that mentality. This woman was doing a good job, a very good job. She's English, which I'm proud to say.
I think we've got the point. We've got the point.
Yes.
No, well, as you heard me say to the previous question, ma'am, yeah, the answer is we have to. And it's not just them, actually. I mean, look at Amnesty International recently, right? I mean, this is an organization that, I remember when I was a kid, I was kind of watching Blue Peter and writing letters, they were an organization that actually you looked up to, right? I mean, now, this is an organization that not only had said what they said about the most recent situation, which was completely wrong, and actually quite frankly offensive, I thought, but also, when you look at what they've said about Ukraine, I mean, this is an organization that has lost its way because these places are being infected by a very dangerous kind of lefty-oriented ideology, which we must root out. And it's not just with regard to foreign policy, if I might say, it's happening here with all the other things that we have to deal with in this country. And that's why I said we need to take on this kind of culture. We need to be robust about it because it's infringing free speech of all kinds on universities. It's trying to rewrite our history. It's trying to erase the notion of women from society, right? And we can't let that happen. We need to be robust about these things, especially actually as it impacts our kids at school, right? Right now, this same kind of culture, this same lefty culture is meaning that parents are not allowed to know what is being told to their kids about incredibly sensitive things on relationships, and that's wrong. So look, whether it's at home or abroad, whether it's domestic institutions or international institutions, we have got to stand up for our values. Those are the values of the majority of hardworking British people. They are our values, and we should not be shy about defending them robustly, and that's what I will do as Prime Minister.
Whoever's got the roving microphone, could they get it to Howard, and could we relieve the microphone? Howard.
Thank you. Rishi, as an established country with unusually clerics in our legislature, sitting with Eric and me, do you think government has a responsibility to encourage respect for and indeed promotion of faith?
Yes, actually, I do. I'm someone who is of faith. I'm a practicing Hindu, and I'm proud that I am. It's an important part of my life, and I think faith is a wonderful thing. It should be shoved down people's throats. It's not for everybody, but I think that people being open to faith is a good thing. I'm not shy about saying that, and it has helped me deal with difficult things in my life. It's given my life extra purpose, and it's a wonderful thing that brings people together. So, I think properly practiced faith is a wonderful thing, and I think government shouldn't be shy about saying it in the same way that you heard me talk about family at the beginning of my speech. Right? I don't think it should be a controversial thing to say that families are a good thing and that they matter. And when we think about public policy, we should think about the role that family can play. Again, we need to be standing up for the things that we believe in. Those are things that I believe in. And I think that the vast majority of British people believe in things like family as well, because they are positive things. And they certainly are conservative values. So they're ones that I will not be shy about talking about if I am lucky to be Prime Minister.
Gentleman over here, and the gentleman with specs on just there. Sir.
Rishi, good evening. Daniel Ronan from Hendon constituency. Can I just bring the discussion back ever so slightly for this question to domestic issues? We have, the last few years have seen we're facing a water shortage in parts of the country, we're facing a gas shortage, we're facing an electricity shortage, we've had issues or the risk of not enough food coming across our borders. Do you subscribe to the view that we need to start looking at strategic resilience in the country and giving it far more prominence and potentially having a cabinet minister responsible?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I do think resilience is really important. And that's why I've said that alongside our net zero target, which you'll all be very familiar with, I want to have a formal energy security target, energy independence target, because that's equally important. And we'll have a strategy to get there and a plan to get there. Food security is something that I'm very passionate about. I represent one of the most rural parts of our country, and for too long we haven't prioritized food security and food production in the way that we should. And I'd like to change that, and I will. But it also goes back to our security as a country, right? The threats that we face. And you think about a country like China, which poses a significant threat to our economic security, if not the biggest, over the coming decades. We need to be thinking about our supply chains now and making sure that we are protected against them. At some point, we're all going to be driving electric cars, right? That will be a good, positive thing. It won't be good or positive if all the rare earth minerals that are in those batteries all come from China. Right? So we need to work now, as I started as Chancellor, to build a supply chain of those types of minerals with Australia, with Canada, with the US, So we can do actually what Janet Yellen, I think, rightly described as friendshoring, right? It's not about becoming this kind of autarkic state where we think we can do everything at home, because that's not practical or reasonable, right? But what we do need to make sure is that we have supply chains that are not reliant on countries that we believe will be antithetical to our values and our interests. And so that's the approach that I would take, and we need to think longer ahead, because the problem is, if you wait till you get to the point where you realize, oh gosh, we've got a problem, it is simply too late. You've just got to be thinking, what are the most critical industries, products, services for us in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and act now so we don't end up in a situation where it's simply too late and someone can hold us to ransom. And I won't let that happen as PM.
Okay, let's just have a rough idea who wants to ask questions. Wow, you are keen, aren't you? Well, listen, if we go for really quick questions and, well, quickish answers, we'll try and get through as many.
Fine.
No restrictions, as they say. Gentlemen here, if we could hand the microphone over like an Olympic baton in a relay race, that would be really good. Gentleman here, and then lady here, then that gentleman.
Being with us this evening, Rishi. I wanted to ask, the adoption of the... my name's Dan Cohen. The adoption of the IHRA definition by our universities is a good first step. But what would you do to penalize institutions that fall foul of it and fail to protect their Jewish students and are found guilty of having, a culture of systemic anti-Semitism?
So I think there is a bill that is slowly working its way through Parliament at the moment that has some clauses with regard to free speech on university campuses, and more broadly, I think from memory, has an accountability framework for that. But I'd be happy to go away and look at that, because there's no point having these things if you can't actually then enforce them and hold people to account. And seeing as we know that there's a problem with free speech already on our university campuses, it's right that whether it's, I don't know what the right body is, probably the Office for Students or whatever it is, that these institutions that are in receipt of an enormous amount of government support uphold the laws, values, and regulations that government has deemed to be appropriate. So again, I'm not shy about being muscular about that, because at the end of the day, these are the values that we care about. We should do what it takes to enforce them and make sure that they're practiced properly.
Lady there, and then gentleman there.
We talked at the church. Greg Hans introduced me to you. I want to ask a question about crime, because the Conservatives are supposed to be the party of law and order. What do you think about truth in sentencing laws in some American states where 10 years actually means 10 years, 15 years means 15 years? You're not allowed to ask for parole. What are your thoughts on
Yes, look, I'm happy to look at those things, and actually we've started toughening up sentencing for the most heinous crimes in the last year or so, which is the right thing to do. The other thing that we need to look at tougher sentencing for are career criminals, because I tell you this, over half of all convictions are accounted for by just 9% of criminals, right? So there's a group of people who disproportionately account for all the crime in our society. The average number of convictions those people have is 19. 19. Now, like all of you, I'm in favor of giving people a second chance, maybe even a third chance, but certainly not a 19th chance, right? So, if we're going to get tough on crime, we need to actually think about how we are treating these people and what is the right sentencing approach for those people in particular. So that will be a priority for me. Because look, I have 2 young girls who I talked about. They're 9 and 11, and the eldest is just starting to walk to school by herself. And for too long, women and girls, especially in our society, have not felt safe enough. And the events of the last year have put that in the spotlight. And as Prime Minister, I want to make sure that we address that. But I also want to make sure that we tackle a crime that we don't talk about enough. And it actually goes back to this comment about kind of our culture and our values. And that is the issue of grooming gangs. And you all know the reason why... We all know the reason why we haven't, and I want to change that. So I've said, actually, I want to have a brand new life sentence for those involved in grooming gangs with limited parole. And I want to make sure the National Crime Agency has a unit. I want to force police teams to actually record the ethnicity of the people doing this, because they don't, which is not right. Because I don't believe, as I'm sure you don't, that we should let political correctness stand in the way of keeping our children safe. And I wouldn't do that as Prime Minister.
Gentleman who has the microphone, and then really this gentleman here, second one here, has been so patient.
Good evening, Rishi. Good evening, Rishi. This is Dorish Metterling from Kensington, Chelsea. I'm just following you around these hustings so I can ask my questions one at a time or so.
Just one.
Okay, I'll just say that I'm very glad you responded to Eric about Jerusalem, because I presume that means you'll potentially move the embassy there. But my question, as the American government has done, but anyway, my question is this. On a government website I found a few weeks ago, under Country Policy and Information Note, the humanitarian situation in Gaza, this is dated July 2022, which takes a so-called balanced view. However, for example, under Section 6, political context, it fails to point out how often weapons are smuggled through the tunnels and that the regime in Gaza violates human rights permanently. There's also no reference to the fact that there were fewer restrictions when there were fewer terror attacks from Gaza. Would you be willing to look at things like that and amend them?
I mean, yes, in the simple answer. Look, if I'm Prime Minister, I want to look at everything we do with a fresh pair of eyes. Not much point in me doing the job if it's going to be the same old. So, what I can't tell you is a conclusion I'm going to reach, but I'm going to happily look at all these things with a fresh pair of eyes and get policy right. And as you've seen from me talk about lots of other things, that I am prepared to be radical. I'm not interested in doing this just to manage the country through. Right? I'm interested in doing this to make a major change to the life, security, happiness, prosperity of everyone in our nation and all the people that we care about abroad. Otherwise, you shouldn't want to stand here on this stage. So believe me, I'm prepared to do those things. You've seen me do them in one particular walk of life, but I will bring, as I said, that same degree of radicalism and fresh thinking to everything else that government does. That's what you get with me, for better or worse. That's the kind of Prime Minister that I want to be.
Let's have more indication. This gentleman here, and then the gentleman at the far corner there, just by the window.
Aside from the fact that he was our last ethnic minority prime minister, is there anything about the life and career of Benjamin Disraeli that still strikes a sympathetic chord with you and resonates 141 years after his death? Thank you.
Well, I quite like your first bit, because that would be nice. It would be nice to be the next one. And again, it would be, on that note though, whatever happens, right, in this contest, something we should be proud of. We're either going to have our third female prime minister or our second ethnic minority prime minister. Who produced all those people? The Conservative Party, right? But he did coin in Coningsby, and he did coin the one nation conservatism mantle, right? And I do think that is apt as we think about the challenges we face this winter. And you heard me talk about it, but a Conservative government that doesn't act to protect those vulnerable people at a time of enormous anxiety for them through something that is no fault of their own is not right. And a compassionate Conservative government, and I'm sure one that Disraeli would have run, would do what I want to do, which is directly support those people, because that's what a compassionate one nation Conservative government should do.
We need more speed in questions. Gentleman there, then the distinguished gentleman there.
Thank you.
Eric, just how do you determine who's distinguished and not? I mean, it's slightly dangerous, that. I mean,
it's those members of the audience I want to suck up to.
Right, where are we? Right. Yeah.
Is this on? Yeah. My name's Glenn. I'm a borough councillor in Hertsmere. And I'm going to ask a local government question, if I may, because in Hertsmere, we are one of the most unaffordable districts in the country outside of London in relation to housing. And the reason for that is because of viability assessments, and we are losing a lot of affordable housing to viability.
And the question is,
what will you do about viability assessments to help us gain more affordable housing?
Yes. So look, the other thing in Hertsmere you have is pretty much more green belt than anywhere else for most constituencies. And one thing I do want to do is empower you, right? So the first thing I want to do is stop having central government dictate to you how and where and how many houses to build. So we will end the kind of planning by diktat to give you more freedom and flexibility, which will protect your green spaces. We will strengthen viability assessments to deal with the issue that you talked about as well, because I think that will help. Because what you talk about ultimately, and sorry, Eric, I'm going to go on for a minute here, so I apologize, right? Because there's something really important, right? Almost everyone, looking at this crowd, almost everyone here remembers what it felt like to get the keys to our first flat, right? Or first house. We remember how special that was. And then we started doing it up and then we maybe got married there, had a family there, right? That is a really special journey, and it is a conservative journey. And we need to make sure that that is possible for people. And that's why there's lots of other things we need to do in housing alongside, for example, using more brownfield remediation, because there's 1 million housing sites we can unlock across the country. We can overcome our British aversion to what we call flat pack housing, but the rest of the world calls modular building, because it's cheaper, faster, and very high quality. And I want to do something in the mortgage market. And so many of you here will either have kids or grandkids who are paying a very hefty rent at the moment and could afford a mortgage. And in fact, the mortgage might even be lower than the rent that they're paying, right? I can see lots of people nodding, right? So what I created as Chancellor was a new 95% mortgage guarantee, actually, which Robert and I did together, right? And it's working. It's everywhere I go. People come to me and say, I've got one of your 95% mortgages, thank you, right? And that is what we need to turbocharge. Because if we can get that right, that dream that we all felt, that magic feeling that we felt, we need to make sure that is possible for a whole new generation of people. And that's the kind of thing I want to do as PM.
In a moment, we'll hear from the very distinguished gentleman over there, and then this gentleman here. But first, we'll hear from Arlo Mazus from West Tyrone. Instead, ahead of tomorrow's hustings in Scotland and in Northern Ireland, how important is it to maintain the union, and in particular to promote the Conservative and Unionist?
Yes, I mean, that's easy. Yes, very important. But look, specifically, what does that mean? Well, it means in Northern Ireland, stopping what is happening with the protocol implementation, which is sucking the Northern Irish economy out of the orbit of the rest of the UK. That's wrong, and we can't let that happen. We have a bill that will fix it, but I also feel as a new Prime Minister, I'll have a chance to reset relationships with Europe, France, and Ireland. And because if we can get a negotiated outcome, it will be far quicker than waiting for that bill to work its way through Parliament. So anyway, we're twin track there. And then with Scotland, look, we need to be activist in demonstrating the benefit of the union in Scotland. Now, that requires us leaning against the civil service, who, as Robert knows, are always too happy to kind of devolve things and forget about them. So you have to be bold as a PM and as a minister to say, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to get there. And I did that as Chancellor to demonstrate the benefit on the ground in local communities. Second thing is we have to remember, in Scotland, who are we talking to? We're not talking to Tories. The Tories are unionists, that's fine. We need to talk to the third of the country that don't vote Conservative, that are unionists. So you need to have a leader who you think can speak to those people, and I can. And lastly, what we can't do is fall into the trap of talking only about trade flows, currency, pensions, borrowing, and all those things. They're all important in the debate about independence. But ultimately, nationalism is a seductive, romantic idea. And if we only answer that with a lot of facts and figures, we will lose. We've got to make an argument about the union that is emotive and speaks to people's hearts. And my grandparents emigrated here. They emigrated not to England, to the United Kingdom. Not because it was geography or places on a map, lines on a map. They emigrated here because it represented a set of values, a set of ideas. And it's those values and ideas that we need to talk about when we talk about the union, because they are more precious. That's what binds us. And if that's emotive argument about the union, that will help us win this argument.
The ultimate distinguished gentleman, and the very good-looking gentleman here.
Thank you, Eric. Philip Taylor from Richmond Park and North Kingston. Can I ask you, when it comes to cabinet government, whether you are a micromanager or a macro manager, and whether you would expand the office of Prime Minister?
Yes, so look, I having seen it up close for 2 years, I know what works and what doesn't work. I'll tell you here's my approach to this, right? Is first of all, government shouldn't try and do everything. So one of the problems is government has tried to do far too much, and government by press release is not a good idea. Right? We've just got to simply focus on far fewer things that are really important and deliver them, right? So that's the first change I'll bring. And I think Jack Welch had a good point about this when he was talking about GE, when he ran it in its heyday. He said he had 2 jobs as CEO. One is to get the overall strategic direction of the company right, and his second job was HR, just putting the best people in the right place. Because there is just simply too much for the Prime Minister to try and control and manage it all. You've got to have great people everywhere. That's what I will do. And I will build a team that represents the talents and traditions of all of our party, because we're a broad church, right? We all have the same values here. We're all Conservatives. We don't agree on absolutely everything. We're not robots. But I want all of you to look at government, cabinet or otherwise, and feel your strand of conservatism represented. That's the kind of team I'll build. But I'll also say this, right? When we're appealing to these swing voters that I talked about, remember, by definition, They are not ideological. They're swing voters. So they're not conservatives. They're not Labour people. They just want government to work properly for them, right? So what I want to do is run a government that is conducted seriously, that's conducted competently, and with decency and integrity at the heart of everything it does. That is the change that I'm going to bring.
Gentleman here, and then the gentleman there, and then we'll see where we are.
Hi, Paul Saper from Woking. Obviously, I think everyone in this room supports your economic policies and what you're going to do in October for people who are less well off. You know, that's a given. However, are there lessons to be learnt from the US legislation that's just gone through from Senator Manchin, who is putting so much emphasis on things like green hydrogen and a whole lot of new sciences, which is actually can be transformational?
Yeah. Well, that is the economy that I want to build. And you heard me talk a little bit about it in my speech, that I want to build the economy of the future. An economy of the future is one built on innovation. That is what drives growth in the 21st century economy. And I know the ingredients that it requires to build that economy, right? We need to get our public investment in R&D right. Make sure it's going to the right places, focus on the right things. We need to have a visa regime that attracts the best and the brightest from around the world. I'll tell you this, half of the founders of our fastest growing companies come from abroad. Half of our STEM researchers come from abroad. So we need to make sure this place is a beacon for those talented people from everywhere. We need to reform all our capital markets after Brexit to make sure all those growing industries and companies can get the financing that they need. And we need to reform our regulations, whether it's in fintech, whether it's in data, agri-tech, clinical trials, life sciences, to make sure that we can reap all the benefits and support innovation. Because that is what we need to do if we want our young people to grow up in a world with fantastic jobs that pay them well and give them every opportunity to succeed. That is the economy that I know how to build. If you just give me the chance, I will build it for you. And not only will we solve problems like net zero, create the new drugs of tomorrow to keep us well and safe, we will create prosperity in every corner of our country. And I am so excited to do that. And that is why I'm standing here.
A gentleman there, but can you just give us an indication of who else would like to ask a question? Okay. Gentleman there.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Rishi. From Harrow. Can you just clarify what your plan is to deal with inflation, as we seem to have inflation both on the demand side and the supply side, and the cost of living crisis?
Yeah. Well, so look, cost of living, I think we've covered in terms of the direct support for the groups of people that really need help. But on inflation, I think there are three things. The first is monetary policy. Now, look, I strongly believe in an independent central bank, and I'm slightly worried about some of the noises I'm hearing from Liz and her team, that they think that the independence of the central bank is something that should be questioned. I personally think that would be a big mistake. It would undermine confidence in the UK, and it's not something that I would remotely contemplate doing. So that's the first of our three tools. Second is fiscal policy, and that's the borrowing bit. Now, look, maybe Liz is right, because you can never be perfectly sure about these things. Maybe it's fine to borrow £50 billion and pump that into an economy where inflation is already spiraling and interest rates are already on the rise, right? I don't think so, right? Didn't work out for Barber. That's why Nigel Lawson is supporting me, because I think that is an enormous gamble. It is a gamble with your savings, your pensions, your mortgage rates, and a gamble that this will last no longer. And I think that's a mistake, and I won't do that, even if it makes my life tough. Then the third of our three tools is a supply side. If we want to bring the cost down of things, got to produce more of them. Simple as that. That's why we talked about energy security before, improving homegrown energy, improving more food at home. Got a plan to do that, and we can do these things quickly. Now, another one is labor, right? And labor, at the moment, there's inflation. Many of you will run businesses. What's the biggest problem other than energy costs? Getting access to workers. There aren't enough, right? And you know why? Because we need to be tougher on our welfare system. Right now, Eric, hang on one sec. Right now, there are more people claiming unemployment benefit than there are job vacancies in the economy. So if we reform our welfare system, we'll move those people into work, which is a good thing for them. And we should be proud to do it. But it'll also ease some of the inflationary pressures in the labour market. Look, so those are the three tools. I'm confident I can deliver it, because if we don't get this right, if we make mistakes in the next few months and this runs away from us, the misery for millions will be incredible, The public will not forgive us, and we will never win the next election. It's as simple as that.
It turns out I'm a rubbish pointer. So the lady who's got the microphone, she may as well ask a question. But the next question will be from this lady, providing this question isn't too long.
Hello, I just want to ask you, why is Britain a very safe haven for the relatives and children of the people who are running Iran and making life misery for their own people with that human rights track record? And are you going to deport this gentleman who wrote a book many years ago and approving and promoting the killing of Salman Rushdie? He lives in North London.
Look, ma'am, you heard what I had to say on Iran previously,
yes.
So hopefully that should reassure you. I think it poses a genuine risk to our values, our interests, and of course our ally Israel in the region, and we should be very hard-headed about it. Yes, there's a situation in Russia going on. We can't take our eye off this particular problem because it needs addressing, and as the situation with Salman Rushdie just showed, it needs addressing sooner rather than later.
My apologies to everybody else I've nodded to, but this is going to be the last question, so I hope it's a really good one.
Bryony Kapoor from the Folkestone Hythe constituency. In the interests of the wider happiness of the nation, do you have any thoughts about disparity of income?
Yes. I mean, we need to make sure that people can have better standards of income. And that's why we need to create a society and a country and economy that is providing opportunity for everyone. And I think the best way to do that is through education, right? It is the most transformative thing that a government can do to transform someone's life chances.
That's not what I'm asking. In countries where national happiness is higher, such as in Scandinavia, there is a proportion that the highest paid have in relation to the lowest paid, say 10 times more, or 15 times more, 20 times more, but not as in the UK, up to 350 times more. Have you had any thoughts on that?
Well, I think the way we solve that is by leveling up those on the lowest incomes, not by trying to cut down those who have done well for themselves. So I want to build a society that is built on a few values. It's built on hard work. It's built on aspiration, right? And as long as we can spread opportunity around, then I'm okay with people doing okay, because I think we all should be. And many people in this room will have worked really hard. They would have started with very little, but their family would have put in, like my parents did for me. They sacrificed and they saved to provide a better life for their kids. And when people do that, when people are prepared to take the opportunities they are given to build a better life for themselves and create something, whether material or otherwise, that is something to be celebrated and rewarded. And we should not be shy about championing that, because quite frankly, if the Conservative Party can't do that, what is the point in us? Right. Good. All right, thanks.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Rishi Sunak. Rishi's can just stay for a few moments to meet one or two people. Could I thank you all for attending, and I look forward to the party uniting together in September.